Home Assistant is undoubtedly the most powerful and flexible smart home platform out there, but it's not for everyone. In fact, even though I use it to run my smart home, I honestly wouldn't recommend it to most people. And in this video, I'm going to talk about why that is and who I think Home Assistant is really for. So the first sticking point is you typically need to build it yourself. Home Assistant is just an operating system. So in the same way you need a PC to run Windows, you will need specific hardware or a hub to run Home Assistant. Now, you can actually run it on your PC or laptop, but most people use dedicated hardware, usually a Raspberry Pi or a mini PC, because these can be left on continuously without interference from other processes, much like a traditional smart hub. But you still need to go out and buy all the parts, put it all together, correctly install and configure Home Assistant, and only then can you actually start using it. Of course, this isn't nearly as difficult as it sounds, and I'll have a video linked below on how to do that. But most people just want an out-of-the-box smart home solution, and Home Assistant has never really been that. Now, at the end of 2023, they actually released Home Assistant Green, which is a pre-built, preloaded smart hub running Home Assistant. And while you still need to add some accessories like a Zigbee or Z-Wave radio to make it a true universal hub, it is as close as you can get to plug and play using Home Assistant, and it is a great option for anyone who doesn't fancy the DIY approach. But that's assuming you can get your hands on one, because it's only available in a few select countries and suppliers in those countries are frequently out of stock. So for many people, it might actually still be easier to just build it yourself. The next sticking point is time, and you will need to put in a lot of time. If all you're doing is adding some basic devices and setting up some simple automations, then it's pretty much on par with other smart home systems. But if you care enough about power and flexibility to use Home Assistant in the first place, chances are you're planning to go a bit further than that, whether it be adding more obscure devices, creating more complex automations, or building some advanced dashboards. This is where things tend to get a bit rocky because it's not always the most intuitive platform, and I'll give you an example. When I first installed Home Assistant, I added all of my Zigbee devices, except there was one that just wasn't compatible. And to make it work, I had to use a different Zigbee integration that supports more devices. Now that alone wouldn't be too bad, but I soon discovered that you can't run both Zigbee integrations side by side. This meant I had to disable the old integration and repair all my devices to the new one. If I had known, I would have obviously used the other integration from the start and saved myself the time and headache. These are the things you just can't anticipate, and unfortunately, this really sums up the Home Assistant experience. I could give you plenty of examples like this, but my point is you will inevitably run into problems using Home Assistant, and troubleshooting problems can be a massive time sink, especially if you lack the experience in this area. Which brings me to my next point. You really should have some technical knowledge going into this, and I don't mean you need a degree in computer science or anything like that, but a basic understanding of smart home tech will go a long way, especially if you're working with various protocols like Wi-Fi, Zigbee, and Z-Wave, and you will be digging through menus and documentation that will be overwhelming if you're not familiar with certain IT and networking concepts. Things like SSL certificates, database logs, DNS, port forwarding, and static IP addresses. That's without all the Home Assistant jargon you have to learn, like entities, scripts, and input booleans. You also need to be willing to dig into core configuration files and sometimes write some very basic code called YAML, because a user interface won't always be there to hold your hand. While all of this can be learned as you go, the time you need to put in goes up significantly, and arguably to a point where it's no longer worth the hassle, especially because there's no official support channel. This is an open source project, and it relies heavily on community-driven support. If you get stuck, you'll likely have to sift through other people's forum posts to find a solution, and sometimes even having to post your own questions. And I should say this Home Assistant community is an amazing resource, but it does require you to get involved in a way that other, albeit more limited smart home platforms don't require of you. Now, one last thing I want to touch on is that you may need a subscription to get the features you want. This is something a lot of people overlook because aside from the hardware, Home Assistant itself is entirely free, but there is an optional paid add-on called Home Assistant Cloud. This is by far the easiest way to enable remote access so you can control things away from home and enable third-party voice control to work with Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. As of right now, it costs $650 US per month or $65 for the year. And if you want those features without paying, there are some ways around it, but the setup process is considerably more complicated and usually not as reliable. Overall, when you consider that most other platforms offer these features for free, it's something you do need to account for when getting into Home Assistant. Okay, so if there are so many problems with Home Assistant, why do so many people, including myself, insist on using it? The answer actually goes beyond raw power and flexibility. Yes, it supports the widest range of devices. Yes, it allows you to build way more complex automations. And yes, it offers the highest level of customization. But on top of that, Home Assistant is a local-centric platform, meaning it's designed to work without reliance on cloud services or the internet. And unlike almost any other smart home platform, it's built on a philosophy of privacy and security, which really ties back into it being a local-centric platform because it gives you full control over your data. So with all that said, let's wrap this up and talk about who Home Assistant is really for. In my opinion, it's more for smart home enthusiasts, people who see this as more of a hobby and not just a means to an end. So if you're someone who likes to build, who likes to tinker with things, Home Assistant gives you a lot of room to explore, and it will test your problem-solving abilities in a way that you'll probably find satisfying. Because with enough trial and error, you can do pretty much anything you can think of inside of Home Assistant, and it feels amazing when something finally clicks. Of course, if privacy and security is really important to you, then it still might be worth using Home Assistant if you have the time to dedicate to it, even if you don't consider yourself an enthusiast. On the other hand, if you're just looking to build a basic to moderate smart home without worrying about all the intricacies behind it, then you're probably better off with a different smart home platform. I have a whole video on this topic, so that will be on screen if you're interested. And if you are sold on using Home Assistant, I'm currently working on a step-by-step tutorial, so subscribe and stay tuned for that. Otherwise, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.